Welcome to Into the Words, a podcast from the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center. Today in the cabin is our dear friend, Emma Otheguy. Welcome, Emma.
It's great to be here.
So we're so glad to have you. Please just take a moment and introduce yourself. Tell us about you and your writing.
Sure. Well, my name is Emma Otheguy. I am a children's book author who writes picture books and middle grade. My work focuses primarily on Latin American history and important figures in Latin America for children, as well as Latinx identity in the United States.
And tell me about your books.
Yeah. So my first book was a biography of Cuban poet and independence leader José Martí. And most recently, I just had a new middle grade novel come out that's for kids ages 8 to 12. It is called Silver Meadows Summer, and it is about a girl whose family has just moved from San Juan, Puerto Rico to upstate New York, and she and her friends discover an abandoned cabin in the woods. So maybe a touch of highlights there.
Well, thank you for sending us a copy of both of those books when they came out. We're honored to have them on our shelves here at the Highlights Foundation. So tell me, Emma, a little bit about your writing and your approach to writing and your process.
Wow, about my process. Whenever I hear that question, particularly in a place like this, I sort of imagine, what I thought my life would be like as a writer, and it involved like waking up at 6 a.m. and like smelling the morning breeze and writing for 2 hours while the world was asleep. And I do get to do that here, but in my regular life, that's just not possible. I feel like my writing life tends to be very varied from day to day, and that's because I do a lot of conferences and I do a lot of school visits. So I'm constantly on the go. I could be every week looks different and every day looks different for me. So many days I'm getting up early in the morning and taking the subway to a school that I'm visiting. Many days I'm getting up in the morning and getting on a plane or a train or a bus to get to a destination. And so that changes my writing life. I work a lot on a laptop, and I work... I carry a notebook and I work when I can. And, I plan at the beginning of the week, I sit down and I think about when am I going to have time to write and what do I need to get done as a writer in the week. But I wish I could say that I had like a routine, and I really don't. But that's also something that I value about myself. I think my mom was someone who always had a lot of energy and always did a lot of things. And she really always taught me to kind of roll with the punches. And I used to be a substitute teacher, like when you're subbing, you're just constantly like anything goes. You have to learn to adapt to any scenario. And so I think it's a valuable skill for a writer to have, is the ability to just figure out when to get your work done.
And I think a lot of our writing community has dreams of discipline around writing, and it's refreshing to hear the realities of writing happens when it can happen.
Yeah, and I think discipline is different than routine. I think we tend to think of discipline as meaning that you do the same thing every day. But if that's not possible, then I think discipline becomes more about the fact of committing to doing what you want to do. And for, I think, folks here, that's writing, even when the context isn't ideal.
I do like that you're intentional about your week, and so you try to find where in the week, just as you're probably scheduling out other activities throughout the week, writing does have some place in your schedule.
Yeah, and that's pretty important to me. I mean, I have, I am a little bit of a planner nerd, and that is because my schedule is so varied, and it's in some ways like because I can't have this kind of organized life, I spend some time doing that. And it's not, what I do is not fancy in any way, but it's just, I have a pad of paper that has the days of the week written on it. And I sit down on Sunday nights and I just figure out what's happening every day, what are my appointments, and when am I getting my writing done.
So in the next couple of weeks, what are you writing? Do you have a specific project? Do you have a number of projects? How are you approaching the next few weeks?
Yeah. So I'm working on a project right now that I'm not sure I'm yet at liberty to discuss. But I can tell you that I'm working on a middle grade book. It's a tie-in for an existing franchise, so it's a little bit different for me. To be writing for a world that already exists as opposed to a world that I have created. So I'll be doing that over the next few weeks and have to get that manuscript in early in the fall. So that'll be my big project. But I'm also working on developing other projects for myself in terms of I want to do another nonfiction picture book, and I have some ideas that are just being developed. And that's really something I do in dialogue with my agent. We sit down and we talk about what's next for me. And, right now I'm working on, again, this project that is a project that I was approached to do by a publisher as opposed to a project that I pitched to a publisher. And so she and I sort of had the conversation of, okay, I'm working on this for the next few weeks, but I don't want, I definitely want to be working on my own original projects as well. And, how can we make that happen? So, yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, let's talk about your time here. This week you're here for the NonFiction Masterclass. And tell me a little bit about, you gave a keynote, just a couple of points that came out of that workshop, that session, please.
Wow. So I gave a keynote, and then I did 2 breakout sessions. My keynote, I wish I could tell you what the takeaway was. I love public speaking. I love giving talks. And I am also very, I'm somewhat spontaneous in my public speaking, in that I do sit down and write up some notes and think about the stories that I want to tell as I'm speaking. But often I'll vary things based on kind of what's happening in the room and the energy that I'm feeling, always with, some notes to guide me. So, I always talk about the importance of books in my life and why I think reading is so valuable, about the opportunity that reading gives us to see a life and an experience outside of our own. And so I'm sure I talked about that. I'm sure I also talked about the Latino community in the United States, and those are always themes that I try to hit on in what I do. And then in my breakout sessions, I was focused on narrative structure in picture books. I think that there's sometimes a sense that it can be very easy to think that because something is a picture book and it's shorter, that it doesn't need to hit all the same notes that a novel would. I think that's particularly tempting in nonfiction. And I really feel strongly that a great nonfiction picture book has the same narrative structure as a novel. I think that's what makes picture books so difficult and so interesting, right, is that you manage to pack in everything that you have in a great 200-page book, but you're doing it with 500 words. And it's really hard, and it's so satisfying when people do it well. As a reader, it's just, I think, one of the most amazing things to see how, this is this amazing capacity that human beings have, is to tell a story with very few words. So my breakout session was all about how can we look at picture books and figure out, where is the exposition? Where is the inciting incident? What is the climax? What is the resolution? Where is the denouement? How does that happen? And looking for those notes in existing published picture books to kind of give us a sense of how other people have done it, and then also applying that to our own manuscripts.
So after talking through the concept, using the mentor text, the example texts, you then had the writers going into their manuscripts and trying to identify those pieces.
Yeah, so I actually asked them to bring a blank copy of their manuscripts, and after we went through some published picture books and identified all of these beats in the published picture books, I asked them to take their manuscript and actually label those moments in their own manuscripts. And if one of those elements is missing, that's usually really helpful to guide a writer to where revision is needed, is if the book doesn't have a clear climax, if it's hard to really tell what the inciting incident is. So I found that really, I hope people found it useful. I really enjoyed doing it. I love looking at what other writers are doing. I love looking at picture books. So that was great. And it's something I do a lot. I mean, when I'm really stuck as a writer, I kind of feel like the best thing you can do is look at what other writers have done and how they figured it out. And you can look at picture books and say, well, that really worked, and maybe that'll work for me, or that really didn't work, and I'm not going to try that. And so
Heidi Stempel talked a lot about mentor
Yeah.
texts and
Yeah.
how important mentor texts are. And the thing that really gets me so excited when I listen to the faculty talking is they take the craft so seriously. And so you can go from reading a book to analyzing a book to understand all those pieces that you're talking about. And that, I think, from what I've heard from the students this week, that's where they've been able to grow in their understanding is what their manuscript is really about and why and how, and that there is a craft to creating and writing for children.
And I think that's so important, returning to that idea that you always see in highlights, products, is this idea that children are the most important people in the world. And I think that when you leave this place, you go out into the world, and there's this general sense that children are, I don't think we live in a society that values children, right? I mean, we have poverty in the United States is concentrated among children. We don't provide children with adequate health or food or other types of, and certainly educational resources. And so I feel like, you leave highlights, you go out into this world where children are not really valued. And then by extension, the work that we do as writers for children is, I think, also not valued in the same way. There's this assumption that if you're writing for children, that there are these associations with domesticity that make writing for children be seen as less serious. There's this assumption that shorter is easier, which is very strange to me as someone who's written both longer work and shorter work. I don't know where people get the idea that shorter is easier. And so I think can be such a challenging thing about being somebody who really cares about children and who really cares about books for children in the world outside of the Highlights Foundation. And then you come here and everybody cares about children's books as much as you do, and everybody takes children and what they read as seriously as you do. And I just really value that. I really love being in a place where instead of me being this weird person who takes this thing seriously, it's just accepted that of course this is important, and of course we would take it seriously.
I've heard people say, I think this was last summer when someone came up to me and said, it's so difficult when I'm at a cocktail party and I say I write books for children, and the person responds and says, "Oh, that's cute. I think I'll write a book for children too."
Right.
And the person's response was, "Well, if you're an accountant, I don't say, 'Oh, that's cute. I think I'll be an accountant someday.'"
Right.
But that's the kind of the impression. And
Yeah.
so here at the Highlights Foundation, it is all about nurturing the author and the illustrator and building that community that really digs deep on craft and talks about the importance of story for children and the effort required to make that story happen.
Yeah. No, I think that's really valuable.
And I think when you're talking about your keynote and you're talking about what was the takeaway, for me, the takeaway was the value of books and a society that recognizes the value for books. And I thought you did a great job of laying out that argument of we need books. All children, all types of children need books. And a society that values books and learning and reading will be a successful society.
Yeah, but I really feel that way. I think book culture in general feels like, especially now that I think that the humanities are sort of, in retreat. If we look at how we're allocating budgets in schools, if we look at enrollment in undergraduate institutions, and when I think about what I value about being a part of this world, about existence as a human, not to get too existential about it, but I do just think that books are the most important thing in my life, and they're, when I think about the fact that we live in this diverse and interesting and big world, and you only really get a shot at living one life, and you never get to see most of what happens. And then books are just like that one lucky thing that give you a peek into the world outside your own, and in a really deep way, because you're really, I think when you read a good book, you're really put into a scenario that expands your horizons in really meaningful ways. And I also think, I think some folks get that from other forms of media. I don't. I have trouble consuming other types of media. I don't know. I have all these vision issues that make screens. I don't know. I get like dizzy looking at too many. So books are important to me, but I also think just the way that they're consumed, the fact that, books are the last form of media that's not advertising to you. And I just think it's really different to be consuming a type of media that isn't just trying to borrow your eyeballs so that it can, sell your time to, the highest advertiser. I think that's become really unique and is a really special thing about books.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to switch gears at least one more time, maybe twice, but talk a little bit about the mentor piece of this nonfiction week.
Yeah. So it's been great. I really like the way we set it up this time, in that every faculty member had a mentor group, so that there were actually 4 students. And the way we did it in my group is we did one-on-one critiques the first day. So I met with each mentee individually. And then the second day, we did a roundtable critique group. So I actually really stepped back there. I was kind of managing the time, because I think time management is super important in any critique group. And I kind of did some encouragement about the structure of the group. But that gave everybody a chance to hear feedback from one another. And then the last day, I did one-on-one critiques again. And I will say, everybody brought work that they had revised from the first day to the third day. And it's really impressive to see the difference in manuscripts from when people get here to when they leave. They're only here a few days. And night and day differences in terms of just a lot really gelled for a lot of people. And they, just some of the manuscripts that writers brought to me yesterday, I was just so impressed by, and I was so impressed by how quickly those manuscripts evolved. And everybody could point to one thing that they'd heard either in a mentor session or in a breakout session that just, like, that was the thing that made everything click for them, and they went back to their cabin and they just, like, rewrote, and it all came together. And it was, I don't think there was a single person in my mentor group who didn't really have a really significant breakthrough. And I was working with one of my mentees for the Diversity Fellowship, and that was really nice to get to know her in person and see her work, and it made me so excited for this year and what's going to happen there.
Well, thank you. That's a perfect segue into our Diversity Fellowship in Children's Literature. Yeah. You are one of our mentors, and you have 2 students you'll be mentoring throughout this 2-year process. The fellows, there are 10 of them. They'll be here 5 times over the next 2 years, 3 as part of the Diversity Fellowship cohort, and then there are 2 choice workshops. And one of your mentees chose this workshop as her choice workshop for nonfiction. And it was just happenstance that you were both here and had an opportunity to get to meet.
No, that was really nice.
So I'm looking forward to September with our Diversity Fellowship kickoff, and we'll have to have another conversation then that talks more about the learning and the process and the activities that come out of that fellowship weekend.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you,
Thank
Emma,
you.
for joining us on Into the Words. The Highlights Foundation is committed to continuing our 35-year history of creating the nurturing that goes into making great stories for children. So thank you for being a part of that with us. And thank you for everything you do to support the belief that children are the world's most important people.
Thanks, George.